Still ahead, the video that has shocked a BC community.
The disturbing video that we first broadcast on Monday has been viewed online more than 50,000 times.
A Vancouver Island judge has handed down the sentences in a notorious beating that was caught on camera.
Tonight, for the first time, we are hearing from the men accused of being involved in what's being called a racially motivated attack on Vancouver Island.
A guilty verdict tonight in the case of 3 white men accused of assaulting a black man in Courtenay last summer.
In Courtenay, 3 men have been found guilty of assault in an apparent racist attack on a black man last July.
It's hard to watch and even more difficult to listen to. 3 white men stalking, then attacking a black man. They wait for him to fall, then
So, Dean Biolo is here from the Comox Valley RCMP. He was one of the 2 investigators on the case from the very beginning, and I'd like to ask for your comments.
Great. Like Bruce said, my name is Dean Biolo. I've been constable in Comox Valley for just over 7 years, so I do have a connection to the community. We're fortunate in that we live in a good place, and many of the officers that are here like the community, they want to stay here, and that definitely gives the community an advantage in dealing with the situations that come up. The call that came in July was a fight call, a fight in progress. It was called in by one of the occupants of one of the buildings nearby. It simply was, there's 3 people fighting, just like any other call that we face every day. Send out a general duty member, send out a second car just as a backup. Member arrives on scene, everybody is gone. Because as you see in the video, the fight is very brief. It's only 20 or 30 seconds. The officer that responded, Constable Barnett, made some inquiries around. Jay was seen walking away, just walking down the street. He went and talked to Jay. Jay had a small cut on his eye. Constable Barnett asked him what happened. And basically Jay said that he was assaulted by a group of people. He provided a description of the truck. Jay didn't say that it was a racially motivated crime right off the bat. Maybe that's because that's something that people use. They're either embarrassed of it, they don't want to admit to it, and maybe that's the case. But right off the bat, he didn't come out and say, hey, these guys beat me up because I was black. If that's a coping technique, that's possible. I don't know. But one of the things he did tell us is that he provided a description of the truck. He said it was a red pickup truck, and there were several white males without shirts on, and it had a Confederate flag in the back. So the officer took his information, wrote down his comments, and proceeded to make some patrols around the area. He found a truck matching that description on a street nearby, took a picture of that truck. The truck didn't have a Confederate flag in it, but to Jay it felt like it had a Confederate flag in it. So, shows Jay the pictures. Jay says, that's not the truck. It was a little different, and it had that flag in it. Of course, people can take stuff down. We later learned from the video that it didn't have that anymore. So, Jay never reported this to us, period. He was not the one. He didn't choose to come forward. He didn't choose to be a victim of this. He probably wouldn't have reported it. Just like other victims of this kind of crime, just carry on in their daily lives. Go on and on. In my 7 years here in the Valley, I haven't had one single report as a general duty member or as a member of the serious crime unit where it's been presented to us that I was beat up because I was black. I was beat up because I was Asian. I was beat up because of some other reason. Whether people, obviously from the stories of the group here, this happens. This happens to people all the time, and they just move on in their lives. This file probably, in all honesty, wouldn't have gone much further than it did at this point. We had a truck, We had a couple of witnesses. We had very minor injuries, because we're not here because of these injuries today. The injuries aren't what we're here with. I see injuries every day where people are badly hurt, killed, and those are serious incidents. What's different about this is that the motivator was the reason that this happened and how it affected everybody in the community. So our investigation took a big change, obviously, when somebody called us and said, "Have you seen this video on YouTube?" It went to our watch commander. Our watch commander said, "No, we don't know anything about it." So they brought up the video at the office, and it changed everything. The watch commander looked at it, immediately realized we have a problem. This is a problem. This goes out and goes out into around the world. So we started to in fact take it a little more seriously than we did initially, because initially it had some sort of attack, some sort of incident that happened. So after that, there's no magic to police work. As Bob will tell you, you don't have to be that smart to be a police officer. But we gathered statements from witnesses, and all the witnesses were very cooperative. Sometimes we don't get that in the community, in different groups that we deal with. But our witnesses were cooperative. They wanted to participate. They weren't afraid of the potential or what these people are capable of. And they provided voluntary witness statements to us. We had the advantage of the video. The surprising thing is when we get the perpetrators of this into our office, they tell us almost the exact same story. They tell us that, yeah, we called him a nigger. Yeah, but we were just angry. So to them it was almost, well, he consented. That usually we get a different story. We get one version, the other version, and the truth in the middle. In this case, they all agreed that the video is what it showed, and these are the words that we called them. Almost like, not a big deal. Well, as it turned out, it was a big deal. We gathered all the evidence, the witness statements, presented it. It's not up to us to determine whether something is a hate crime. That's up to the judge. Any crime can be considered a hate crime. There's no specific section, and I don't want to take away from what Bob wants to talk about, but we investigate every crime. We present the evidence. In this case, we did everything we could to bring all the witnesses together, and they provided their statements, and that's how we ended up here today.
Now I'd like to ask Crown Counsel, Crown Prosecutor Bob Richardson, to talk a little bit about the experience actually prosecuting a hate crime. There are a number of issues related to the prosecution that I know for a fact lots and lots and lots of people just don't understand. And so I wanted to give Bob an opportunity to share with us what it's like to prosecute such a high-profile case right here in our community involving something that so many of us find so distasteful.
Thanks, Bruce, and I appreciate the invite coming. It's nice to be able to have a chance to explain to folks why we did what we did, how things unfolded what they did. I think that's important. It's also quite nice, quite frankly, to get a chance to, as you said, listen again and sort of get other people's perspective, because we get one perspective as we're going through the system, and we get blinders on about this is what we have to prove and this is what we have to do and that, and it's nice to sort of get a chance to sit back afterwards and hear from other people. Wanted to speak about a couple of things with respect to the law, to sort of give you an idea of how it works, and it might explain a little bit about how the result came about the way it did. Dean had mentioned the fact that we don't have a law, or a law, you can't commit a hate crime, sort of an offense known as a hate crime in the criminal code, and that's true. What we have is section 718.2 of the criminal code, that if you commit a certain offense and you're found guilty of an offense, then it is an aggravating feature that has to be considered at sentence if it was motivated by prejudice or hate or bias against a particular race, a particular religion, if it was motivated by any of those things, sexual orientation, that sort of thing. And what that means is that somebody has to be found guilty of the offense, first of all. Once they are found guilty, the court can then go on, if the circumstances warrant it, to conduct a bit of an inquiry about whether in fact they were motivated by these things. And if they are, then it's an aggravating factor, and it means that it reflects on sentence. What that means to start out with, these three fellows were charged with assault, is that we had to start out by proving the assault beyond a reasonable doubt. If we were able to do that, and we were able to do that in this case, we then go on to the whole consideration about whether any of them are motivated by prejudice or bias, racial prejudice or bias. And in the case of Mr. White, the court found that that was in fact the case. It's up to the court, it's up to the Crown, to prove, first of all, the offense, and secondly, the bias beyond a reasonable doubt. And if the court's got any doubt about any of that, then they have to find that that's not the case. In our case, we had the assault. An assault is something that is defined as being essentially a laying of hands on somebody without their consent. They can't consent to it. And that was the issue. There's no doubt that these three obviously laid hands on Jay Phillips. We saw that in graphic detail several times. The issue was whether Jay Phillips had consented to them. And that was what it came down to, the burning issue at trial. In order to prove that, as the judge referred to, what we see is sort of the second half of things on that video. What we didn't have video of is how the whole thing started. And what we had was two conflicting stories of how it started. We had the story of Jay Phillips, and we had the story of the three accused. And Dean referred to that. The only other evidence that we had to offer with respect to what occurred ahead of time was an independent witness who was walking to the gas station close by with his grandkids, who had heard some yelling and screaming, saw three white males standing close to a black male who was Jay Phillips. He didn't know any of the parties, and what he saw was Jay Phillips yelling, "Come on, I'll take you all on," and taking a swing at one of the three of them. And that was all we had for independent evidence. In light of all of that, it's not surprising that Judge Doherty found that Jay Phillips had consented to initially getting into a physical altercation with respect to the three males. It was because of that, that's all we had. I had argued that some of what Huber probably did have his own motivations, and that is that he's a troubled man who, when he gets drunk, wants to take on the world, and that got him in trouble over and over and over again. That's why you kept seeing those things where Mr. Huber's in custody on other matters. He kept getting in trouble on bail because he'd getting drunk and get in fights, and it didn't matter color, race, or anything. He's just an ugly drunk when he gets drunk, and that's unfortunately something he's going to have to address. But that probably didn't have anything, according to the judge, to do with race as far as he's concerned, as it did with that particular issue. So we then go on to sentencing. The judge has found that with respect to Mr. White only, it's an aggravating factor. He was acting motivated by racial prejudice. Where does that leave us? The criminal code doesn't specify anything other than it's an aggravating factor. So we don't have a tariff. This means that you're going to go to jail for 3 months for this or anything like that. It just says it's an aggravating factor that the court has to consider. And when the court is sentencing somebody when they've been found guilty, they have to consider all aggravating and mitigating factors in the sentence. This is a specific aggravating one. I think it's left purposely vague. I was wondering, it took me a long time sort of going through the cases. It's purposely vague. because it's intended to cover all sorts of behaviors or misbehaviors, if you want to call it that. It's supposed to cover the gamut from, from skin-headed neo-Nazis running around in the subways beating up poor unsuspecting people because that's their true white supremacist belief, to somebody who's gotten into a traffic accident with a cab driver who's not, white and who winds up calling them a number of names and slapping them. The cases sort of seem to go from that essential range. And so the judge has to decide what's the appropriate sentence with respect to these people based on all of the circumstances. In White's case, he was a young person, 18 at the time of the incident. He had a limited old youth court record that for the purposes of the Young Offenders or the Youth Criminal Justice Act was something that really the court couldn't consider as being aggravating. He had been on bail for a year and a half and he had had one incident where he'd been caught with some beer, but otherwise he had behaved in pretty restrictive conditions. And the other thing was that that seemed to be important in Judge Doherty's mind was the fact that because this went globally, worldwide, and was in the media spotlight and in everybody's spotlight for so long, these three have been shamed and denounced essentially worldwide and certainly in this community significantly, and that seemed to have some sort of tempering effect on the sentence. I asked the judge to put him in jail because of the seriousness of what happened, and because of the fact that he was acting on the basis of prejudice, and because really he started it rolling when it comes down to it. It was his comments, his racial comments that started it. It was the match that lit the gasoline, and that sort of ramped it up through. The judge said that normally speaking on a low-end assault with somebody with a limited record and youthful, they would never ever go to jail. With that, in these circumstances, he has to consider it, and wound up giving him what they call a conditional sentence, which is a jail sentence in the community, if you want to call it that. You're not going to jail, that's the bottom line, but that's what conditional sentences are, and felt that was appropriate. When judges are considering what sort of sentence is appropriate, they have to consider not only the aggravating and mitigating factors, they also have to consider other cases, and other cases sort of set a range of appropriate sentences. And although the judge didn't order what I had asked, what he did sentence him to was within the range of cases. And so as a result of that, it's something that's not appealable, it's within the range. He didn't misconstrue or miss any law or any facts or anything like that. So it's not going to be appealed in the bottom line. So that's where we're at. I know that for many people, they were asking, how could somebody get so little of a sentence for something like this? What kind of message does this send? And all I can say is that the court has to consider everything when finding whether there's guilt or innocence and finding whether somebody should go to jail or not. So racial prejudice is a factor. It's an aggravating factor, and it's a serious aggravating factor, but it has to be looked at in the context of all of the other circumstances. That section was an attempt when Parliament enacted it to sort of address concern in the core Canadian value of racial tolerance and of not making it an aggravating factor if racial intolerance or intolerance of other kinds is a motivating factor. But they've got to, as with everything else in the criminal justice system, balance that out with all the other appropriate factors. And bottom line is, the criminal justice system serves criminal justice, and if we don't sort of adhere to those rigid rules about considering everything and balancing everything and considering prior cases and that, then the system breaks down. And the system breaks down, and it's not a good thing. You can see that in some of the other countries where it has. And so that's where we're at. The only other thing I'm going to say is that the criminal justice system isn't set up to cure racism. It's just not. It's set up to address it as an issue. But that I think that things like this, things like the rally that Megan organized shortly after this incident, probably go a lot further in addressing concerns about racism, and should be. That should be where the main focus is.
Are there any questions that anybody has?
I'm just wondering if how you would have responded if the judge had been open to some sort of restorative process in the midst of the sentencing, whereby there was a possibility of a conference involving the young man who was attacked and the other 3 young men and community people. If that had been part of the sentencing process, or as perhaps a follow-up after sentencing. If the judge had been open to that, can you see something like that being brought into the current system?
Absolutely. I think that, as a matter of fact, back in the 80s, I know in the Lower Mainland they used to have what we call a victim offender reconciliation program as part of the sentencing process. And I think that's a great idea. Thanks for asking me that, because it reminds me, when we were talking about it earlier, Bruce, and me initially saying, no, we won't go through that process at the front end. I'm still quite comfortable with that decision not to do it at the front end. And the reason for that was because of the seriousness of it, and because it was important to have sort of a full, open, public hearing of what actually happened.
I can't help but also project myself into that situation of being on the corner, having a group of guys come by, yell, nigger at me, and try to say, to myself, what would I do? I was driving up by I just got out of the hospital actually for a heart operation. I was driving up by the lake, taking my daughter and my new grandson to see that part of the lake. And so this young man was standing on the side of the road, said the same thing. Oh, there's a nigger. And I could feel this hot feeling like fire go up my back. Had I been healthy, I can't tell you what I might have done. As a matter of fact, I drove past him and I stopped. And my daughter said, "You don't want to do that, right?" But this kind of situation, for me, reminds me of being in the southern states when I grew up, and so I could go to the police, and I'm going to get the same response from the police that I got from the perpetrator. I'm going to go to court, and I'm going to get a similar response. And I don't expect that Jay expected the kind of sensitivity that would alleviate that kind of a situation, that would even address it, right? And for good reason. I get racism on a very, very kind of minor level. It's if I go to City Hall, or and I've been in situations where I was a member of Rotary Club, and it's like it's very subtle. It's there, and that you're not getting the full range of it, but it's there. And if you ask the person, they probably wouldn't even be aware of it. So what I'm saying is that we're not talking about just racism in terms of those three guys. That a lot of the racism that's most damaging is in the institution and in the people who are supposed to alleviate it. So that's what I was. I'm sorry.
How do you find police officers deal with you in here or in Vancouver or wherever you are? Do you find?
I'm a different individual. I don't deal with policemen any different than I deal with anybody else. Were I a young black male who wasn't me, I could, it would be a different story. I mean, because I talk to a lot of black people, and my son-in-law, who looks exactly like me, would tell you a whole different story. I would tell you two things. That whenever there's those kinds of racist things, there are the people who do it, and there's the people who expect it. I have learned to not expect it. And I can't even tell you how I do that. And it works. Because I not only don't expect it, but I don't tolerate it. And there's something about the way that I do my life that doesn't bring it to me. But my daughter would tell you a whole different story. Most of the black people in this community would tell you a very different story. That's what I have to say about it.
Hello. First, I guess I want to just again thank the Comox band for allowing me to live and work on their land and to be here today to talk to everyone. When Bruce asked me to come and talk here, I wasn't totally sure about what exactly I could bring to the conversation from my perspective. And then when I sat down and started thinking about what I was going to say, I realized that I have a lot I can bring to this conversation because I grew up with a lot of discrimination in my life. As Bruce has said, I'm a member of the Mowatchit First Nation, but I was also raised up until the age of 10 when my mom committed suicide as a Jehovah's Witness. So I grew up as a Jehovah's Witness who also practiced First Nations culture in small town America. I'm sure you can guess what a lot of the outcomes were in a lot of the places that I lived. Some of my earliest memories are of doors being slammed in my face because I was a Jehovah's Witness and I went door to door and being sworn at and being called names when I was in elementary school just for being brown. They didn't know what I was, and I'm sure most of you even looking at me just by looks, you wouldn't know what I am. Most people think that I'm Latino or Puerto Rican, you know, and when they find out that I'm actually half First Nations and half Caucasian, they don't know what to say. I grew up in a really diverse family. You know, my mom being the Jehovah's Witness, she also had multiple personality disorders. She was sexually abused throughout her childhood and ran away. And my dad was a residential school survivor. So he harbored a lot of racism in his life. And I grew up with it, and I experienced it. It's always been around. My first trip to the valley here, I came to visit one of my friends who was a youth worker at Youth Connections. I was a youth worker at the time, and we were looking at collaborating on some projects. And I was visiting them at the center, and I came across a pamphlet in their brochure racks that talked about how hate groups are active in the Comox Valley. And it really took me aback. Like, I didn't know what to think. It was warning other youth about how there are white supremacists that are actively looking to recruit in the valley, and it explained how to react if they try to approach you. And it really gave me an impression of the Comox Valley as being a racist community when it was my first visit here. And here it is on a brochure rack, warning you that there's hate groups out there. And then I'm walking down the street and I see this bar that has Confederate flags as its logo, and I'm thinking, wow, this must be a really intolerant place. Because there's a lot of people that defend the Confederate flag, yeah. But as someone that grew up in small town America, I know what sort of ideologies are connected with that flag, and that combined with my experience at the youth center just made me not want to come back here. And then I moved here. So, I moved here because one of the reasons I thought that for some reason I had the impression that there was a very active and strong First Nations community here that I could probably, get involved in and help. And I never see First Nations people around, and I've always wondered why. You don't see a Native walking down the street, and I still don't see it. It's a very rare occasion. So I've got a 3-year-old son, and when this YouTube incident happened, I just really started to question, is this the place where I want to raise my son? Is he going to grow up here with the same kinds of experiences that I grew up with as a child, being discriminated against for my religion or for my cultural beliefs or for my skin color? And it's a question that I still battle with, but coming here and seeing all the people that are here, it sort of gives me hope. What else can I say about racism in the Comox Valley except that it exists? It really does exist, and it exists from the top down and the bottom up. When there's a lot of people that criticize the Courtenay Council for not signing on to the Critical Incident Response Protocol, and there's people that defended their decision, and I'm sure there's logic behind their arguments, but at the same time, there has been times in the past where they never signed on to these initiatives that would protect people of diverse backgrounds. And one of the reasons one of these counselors said he wouldn't sign on to it was because the motto gave the assumption that you had to respect all religions, and he didn't necessarily respect all religions. And when you have a politician in power in a community like that, it tells me that there's probably a lot of people that are of like mind. And it scares me. It really does. And you know what? I think that racism isn't limited. When you think of racism, a lot of people think Caucasian, but it's all people. Some of the most racist things I've ever heard came out of the mouths of my own ethnicity. First Nations people. I've heard some of the dirtiest garbage you'd ever hear in your life. And people like my dad and my uncle who went to residential school. My uncle, I remember, he told me that he was racist against white people until he was in his 60s. And he was in residential school until he was 13, 14. And he went to a workshop and worked on, the residential school survivors. And so I just think that in order to fight racism, we need to fight it with love. In my language, the word for love is yakmis, and it's also the word for pain. And I think it implies quite a bit. I think we need to fight it with love and realize that sometimes love is going to hurt you, the love that you give to people. But we need to stand up, first of all, with people that we're closest to, our family. You make a comment, you need to stand up to it if it's wrong. That's all I have to say.
I want to express my profound appreciation for the comments of our three speakers. What they have said has hit me very, very hard, and in fact, most of which I knew was going to be said, and yet to hear it again, it's hearing it again for the first time.
You want me to start? I can start. My experience of racism, I guess, is as a child. And this is, and I think it's Canada-wide. But anyway, as a child, we had children from First Nations Reserve in our school, and I'm going to advocate responsibility because I don't believe I performed the racist acts, but I certainly didn't stand up and defend. And so therefore I've always sort of felt a little guilty. But my classmates are the children that I went to school with were horribly racist toward the First Nations children. And as a result, very few of them ever finished school. Very few of them went beyond grade 6, let alone grade 8. They kind of disappeared. And I became a teacher eventually, and I always in Saskatchewan, a small town Saskatchewan.
How small?
Oh, 400, 500 people.
But he probably would be. If he was out with his Vietnamese friends, Carla, the Vietnamese kid, and him, he could count on being murdered by the police. And this was in Courtney. And I remember just chatting with, because of my work, I was at a meeting of addictions counselors one day and just chatting with a high school addictions counselor. I didn't tell her where my kid went to school. I didn't tell her who the friends were. I mentioned in passing we had all these Vietnamese friends, and she said to me, Anne, if your son is hanging out with Vietnamese boys, he's dealing drugs.
All the language and basic stereotypical racism runs the gamut from, the comments like the packers, the ragheads, and all the, language that's used against First Nations and, in the schools. And it's been a pretty pervasive part of, just the overall experience for my whole life. So I certainly have seen it. Even living in other countries, I lived in Israel for a few years, and, of course, you see and hear lots of various types of prejudice, comments between Arabs or the Israelis or the Jewish. It's everywhere.
Yeah, it is everywhere. I guess I've experienced different types of racism, as all of us have, probably. Most of my experiences were in Nova Scotia. And I've also had experiences of racism, I guess, with my disability. But I guess what it's taught me is what I would like to bring to it. Is I have some great stories.
I have a good feeling about the valley, but I wasn't willing to risk my grandchildren being raised here in this community. So, and it's interesting because my son is white and my daughter is black. And when my daughter finished, when my daughter finished high school, she said she wanted to move to the United States to be with her people. Her father is African, I'm Canadian. But she wanted to move to the States to be with her people so she didn't experience the racism in this country. She said it's easier down there because it's overt, and here it's covert. I'm sorry.
Now, is that where she is now?
No, she's up in Port Hardy.
Oh, right. And how's she doing?
She's raising 3 beautiful children. That's all she's doing.
I think it's okay to say something. Good for you for standing up and saying something, you know. And even if he said that, you can still say it again. Say, well, I think it's offensive. You know, it's still meaningful. He's subconsciously maybe hearing a message. An experience of racism. Well, I teach English as a second language at North Island College, so I work with people from very diverse backgrounds. Many people from, you know, overseas and many immigrants in the community. So I hear a lot of stories. Here and in Campbell River, I've taught in both places, of being followed in stores when you go shopping. A lot of Asian women, and particularly Vietnamese women, have shared stories like that with me, getting followed in stores. And just in general, all types of experiences related to race, from not finding a place to live to having fewer opportunities for employment, and other types of discrimination as well. So someone who's very fluent in English but may have an accent, having less likelihood of getting a job because of their accent.
And take food over and visit with her. And she didn't offer tea that day, and I couldn't understand why, because it was a sign of friendship. She was an elderly lady, and the water truck had broken down, and I was in my 20s, and I hated white people. You know, it's terrible. But water truck had broken down, and she was melting snow to cook with and to drink. And of course the huskies were running free and peeing in the snow and stuff like that, and this is what she was drinking. So I went to town hall where he was a policeman, like on the military side, and I'm raising a stink in town hall there, and of course they phone Larry. Well, this crazy woman's raising a stink, and I'm threatening to phone George Rasmus and everybody I know in Edmonton and hit the TV stations because my friend is not getting water. And in my mind, there was a perfectly good fire truck sitting there doing nothing. Go deliver water. You've got one day or I'm reporting you. And Larry goes, describe this crazy woman. He goes, oh, you better do it. It's my wife, you know.
And because the way I am running my business, I have my guideline, I have my regulation. Doesn't matter. I don't judge people because you are rich or you are poor. You are poor, it's okay. Just tidy. Get tidy and neat. Okay? And well, I judge people from the behavior. If you behave, you respect others people will respect you.
Of course. And that's when it starts to change. I think we have to take more risks in our community and bring people together that might have these thoughts that we don't agree with and bring them into the same rooms.
Mm-hmm. Open dialogue.
Yeah.
Megan is, I think most of you will know, an incredibly active member of this community. She's the Associate Director of the Music Fest. She's the President of the Chamber of Commerce of Cumberland. She's an independent consultant. She's been active in all the sort of the various organizations across the community, active in tourism marketing and so on. Very early on in the process of the Critical Incident Response Protocol, Megan Curzons agreed that Music Fest wanted to sign on to the protocol because they wanted that document to be a part of the way and the culture that they operate the Music Fest weekend in Comox Valley. one of the requirements, or one of the parts of the protocol, is that the signatories agree to participate in ongoing education and in responding to incidents of racism as they might occur. Within 3 days of the incident occurring, so by Monday, July the 6th, a number of individuals felt a need to have a community statement, a community response to this incident. In the course of 3 days, between the 6th and the 9th of July, and this is really what I wanted her to talk about, because she actually understands what I'm about to say and I don't. She used all the social media, email, which I do understand, but Facebook, Twitter, Tweet, and several other things. Posters, newspaper articles, radio interviews, just commanded this entire communications operation in association with probably half a dozen other signatories to the protocol. It was spontaneous. It was organized by individual signatories working together and collaborating with their partners and members of their group. It was not organized by the Community Justice Center as the administrator of the protocol. In fact, I was actually out of town and lying on a bed in a hotel in Vancouver when the news came on in the morning and I saw the first report of this incident. I didn't get back to town until Wednesday. But in the space of 3 days, and this is one of the things that I think we need to really understand and begin to figure out how to utilize it for our purposes, within the space of 3 days, 1,000 people arrived on the plaza of the Sid Williams Theatre, not for an attack upon 3 white men who had committed an assault, but as a community statement of the non-acceptability or non-countenancing of this kind of assault, and essentially calling for the community to move forward and to address those underlying issues. At that rally, and you saw just a very, very brief snippet of it, there's actually another video of a broader section of it, but at that rally, Wesley Speck was the host on behalf of the Wattier Friendship Center, which is another signatory group. And he set the context of that 1,000-person rally by talking about the First Nations perspective on how we live together. And he told a story at that rally that really framed the whole experience. Mayor Phillips was present at the rally, although he did not in fact speak. But he did have Wedlady commit at that rally to carry on and do further work in this community in response to the incident. So there was that sort of political positive outcome. The presence of 1,000 people was astounding. That, by the way, that video also went global. And it was covered I saw reports of that rally in newspapers out of Latin America, South America, India again, and Europe. So the coverage of the event was very powerful, and it was, as I say, organized by half a dozen people with some adept skills in electronic communication. But it tapped into the spirit of this valley in a way that was almost spontaneous. And it brought them out, and they were there, and they were present, and they made it very clear that this was not the kind of behavior that was acceptable in the Comox Valley, and they were not going to put up with it. And this has got to end. And it was a very, very powerful statement, and a very impressive piece of spontaneous community organizing immediately following the incident. And that's what I think the community would have told us had she been able to be with us.
Social media has just had a profound effect on how we react to things.
Yeah, if that video hadn't been taken,
who would have known? Who wouldn't have known? No.
And so the video was a way of asserting against a violent or negative behavior that I don't think is something that we talked about enough.
trying to learn to speak assertively, as we've discussed, but also using that social network. Somebody used that video very well. I've never heard about the person who did it, or why they did it.
No, we never have. That's
And
interesting.
we also, there were a few times where you saw the white car pull in to the parking lot.
Oh, yes.
And I heard a little bit about, it was a woman who drove that car and who drove in to intercede, and that kind of broke out.
Yeah, it looked like that car that was coming into the parking lot was trying to break up the fight.
Yes, because they didn't pull. One car pulled into a parking spot, but the one before
the other
that
one kept
went
going,
straight.
and that made them move.
Yes, right.
I thought that was kind of. I was trying to think what I would do if I saw something like that. And if I were driving, I think that's what I would do. I would very slowly go directly towards them to break it up.
Yeah.
And there's all these kids at the parking lot, and there's a fight breaking out. And so this fight starts to go. First day, I get to Emma, so I'm thinking, oh, whoa, what is this? So it's not football people, it's just these school kids. And there's this fight in the middle of the parking lot. And what my coach does, and he's kind of scary. Anyway, he just marches up to them and he says, go into the grass, so no one gets hurt. Because they're pushing each other onto the pavement and stuff. And then he says, I'm calling the cops. And so he doesn't try and stop it or anything, but that's what he does. He kind of diverts it over there, and then he says, I'm calling the police. And that's what he did. And then the police came and broke it up. Yeah.
Well, I think there probably are times when you have to consider your own safety. You don't want to be foolhardy. But then again, it takes a lot of courage to intervene, I think, especially if it's more than one or two. We've all done it perhaps in a smaller way. I remember we live on the water, and there were some children chasing a snake that was swimming, and they were obviously going to do harm to the snake, and I went running outside without thinking, saying, that's absolutely wrong. But that doesn't take as much courage as dealing with adults, especially young testosterone, as they say, testosterone fueled men.
Well, I think appropriate courage is what I'm really interested in. This business of finding the right phrase, using social network properly, remembering a good example, stopping children who are in unthinkingly hurting another species. This is what I wish we'd talk about more. Because I would take courage from that. I would learn how to stop beating myself up for not acting and feel I had more of a repertoire to draw from.
That's a very good point.
So
maybe we need another conference on, or maybe that's part of. I don't have
steps to courage.
Yeah, steps to
appropriate
courage.
Courageous actions.
A woman in the room here who facilitates a thing called compassionate listening, Naomi, and one of the things she always puts up on the wall is the enemy is an untold story. And kind of like what you're saying, we have these biases of that we bring into, but I don't know your story until you tell me. So, and then I find out that it has nothing to do with color, or it's we're the same.
Issues that are there that, if they're not dealt with, will continue to manifest themselves out in this type of language, behavior, and attitudes. And unfortunately for them as well, not just the victims of that behavior and the attitude, but for them as well, I think some empathy should be there, because they're not going to be happy in their lives either, I don't think. They're going to continue to have problems. They're going to be in trouble with the law, they're going to be going to court, they're going to be doing, jail, and they're going to be fighting. It's going to affect all of their relationships in their life with their friends, their families, with potentially their spouses, if they become parents.
Down when his mother was speaking, because the one tiny slur that started it and escalated it is actually creating a reaction of that whole armor coming off at once. And so you can sort of see, well, yeah, he did do that, but if it weren't for that life with those stones of insult non-stop, then that reaction would have been
provide a place for them to see a different way, to give them some way of doing that allows them with some face saving, some dignity, some process. And I think that's partly where the restorative justice piece is there, because I mean I've done a lot of work around conflict management, and I truly believe that if you push people to a positional place, they just dig in deeper and deeper and deeper. Sarah Palin's 5-minute video on Facebook is a perfect example of that. You push and they just dig in deeper, and if they feel they have some support, it's really easy to stay dug in.
Environmental toxins, they're there in our environment, and they're cumulative. And as they build up, they have to sometimes come to the kind of critical mass that this incident provoked people to understand that we had come to a critical mass. I can only just imagine how much they build up, incident by incident by incident, like a toxin in the body of someone who is exposed to them on a regular basis. What I admire is the presence of people who are able to say, I don't expect that. I expect to be treated differently. When they explain their experience to me, which is so foreign to me, and when I see hearing someone else explain their story and they nod their head, and I think, what grace that toxin does not spill over very often, but it actually leads to something healthy like this. So I just want to express my gratitude.
As I listen to Dean and Bob, I hear them just kind of surmising here that they're dealing with people's behavior, and that's what's part of the justice system and what they can deal with, and it's their behavior that we can prosecute. But bigger than that is the whole question we've also talked about, and that's what's motivating that behavior, and that would be attitudes. And it's from our attitudes that our behavior results, and we can't prosecute attitudes. But I'm wondering if Dean or Bob had alternatives at any stage of this incident where they could have introduced an opportunity for restorative justice, or is that what we're moving toward today? To the creation of some, I don't want to say institution, the creation of something new, or maybe it already exists, I just haven't heard it, some alternative. Because it's hard to change attitudes using the law. So if we want to change attitudes, we have to get a little deeper, we have to start younger, and we have to have a kind of bigger mechanism. So I haven't heard that either of them had that alternative open to them, but I might not just know about it. And if not, if they didn't have some alternative open at that stage, is that where we are? Is that what we want to do?
It's something that deals with and provides consequences for your actions. It's difficult to correct people's attitudes and behaviors at that point. And that's where it's up to the people in this room and the organizations they represent to correct those behaviors, to promote positive behaviors. The criminal justice system isn't ideally suited for that. It does do it to some degree. These individuals, as Bob noted, didn't demonstrate the remorse or the recognition of guilt to afford them that opportunity. Plus, given the totality of that situation, it wasn't really an option. It had to be above board. It had to go through the criminal system to get there. But we have to look at the bigger picture of where do you go from here, and that's going to the younger people in schools. And as Ian stated, we have to introduce these attitudes.
I think that education is the answer, and I think it's one person at a time. I truly believe that as we can create more opportunities in this community for people who come from different faiths, who come from different upbringings, who come from different countries, who come from different ways of seeing the world, where they can talk to each other and understand each other, that we have an opportunity to then shift attitude. And I agree that it needs to happen with children. I also think it needs to happen with all of us. I don't think it's just the kids. I think all of us have a responsibility to create opportunities for people to talk to each other. And if there was a